Captain Jake Morrison, better known as Wrench to anyone who'd shared a drink or a wrench to the face with him, was having what he generously called one of those days. And by one of those days, he meant the kind where the coffee machine was broken, the artificial gravity kept hiccuping, and his cargo hold was full of mining equipment that smelled suspiciously like someone had used it as a bathroom. The lucky strike wasn't much to look at. Hell, she wasn't much to look at, even when you squinted real hard and had been drinking. But she was Jake's ship, bought with 15 years of salvage work, and a poker game that definitely hadn't involved any cheating whatsoever. Cross his heart and hope to die in the vacuum of space. "Computer, remind me again why I took this job?" Jake asked, wrestling with a particularly stubborn hydraulic coupling that had apparently decided today was a good day to retire. "Because you needed the credits, Captain Morrison, and I quote, desperately, before the repo men find us," the ship's AI replied, in that annoyingly helpful tone that made Jake wonder why he'd programmed it to be so honest. "Right, thanks for that." The thing about being human in this corner of the galaxy was that everybody else had already decided where you fit in the food chain. And spoiler alert, it wasn't at the top. Humans were what the galactic community politely called a developing species, which was diplomatic speak for cute, but probably tasty. Most aliens looked at humans the way Jake looked at a particularly clever hamster. Adorable, sure, but not exactly intimidating. The Catharan Empire, for example, had built their entire civilization around the concept that might makes right, and they had enough might to back up that philosophy. 9 feet tall, covered in scales that could stop a plasma rifle, and equipped with claws that could open a can of beans or a jugular with equal efficiency. They were the kind of species that other species crossed the street to avoid, assuming they had streets, or the ability to cross them, which made the distress signal currently blinking on Jake's console particularly interesting. "Computer, run that again, and tell me you're kidding." "I am incapable of humor, Captain. The signal is definitely Kytharan Imperial Navy, designation Bloodfang, flagship class. They are requesting immediate assistance." Jake stared at the readout. The Bloodfang was the kind of ship that usually sent distress signals to entire star systems, not the other way around. It was like getting a call for help from a natural disaster. "Well," Jake said, reaching for his tool belt and checking his sidearm out of habit. "Curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. And I've always been more of a dog person anyway. Captain, regulations clearly state that civilian vessels should not respond to military distress calls without proper authorization." "Computer, when have I ever followed regulations?" "Never, sir." "Shall I set course for the Bloodfang?" "Damn right. And computer, start brewing a fresh pot of coffee. Something tells me I'm going to need it." 20 minutes later, Jake was regretting every life choice that had led him to this moment. The Bloodfang was massive, the kind of massive that made you question your place in the universe and wonder if maybe you should have listened to your mother about getting a nice, safe job in accounting. The docking bay was eerily quiet. No crew, no lights except for the emergency strips, and a smell that Jake's nose helpfully identified as probably not good. His boots echoed in the silence as he made his way through corridors designed for beings considerably taller and more intimidating than one slightly undersized human with a tool belt and a questionable sense of self-preservation. "Hello?" Jake called out, his voice swallowed by the vast emptiness. "Anybody home? I'm here about the distress call. Also, I brought coffee." A low growl from somewhere ahead made Jake's hand instinctively move to his sidearm. Then he remembered that his sidearm was designed for scaring off pirates and the occasional drunk miner, not for whatever could growl like that. He found Commander Veltar in what used to be the bridge, 9 feet of apex predator, scales the color of dried blood, and claws that could probably carve his name into a bulkhead. Currently, those claws were pressed against a wound that was leaking something that definitely wasn't ketchup. "Stay back, meat," Veltar snarled, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. "I will not be finished by prey." "Wow, okay, hello to you too," Jake said, raising his hands. "I'm Jake. I got your distress call, and I'm pretty sure meat isn't my preferred pronoun." Veltar's eyes, yellow and vertical pupiled like a snake's, focused on him with the kind of attention usually reserved for dinner. "Human, of course. The universe mocks me even in death." "Hey now, let's not jump straight to death. I've got a first aid kit and a can-do attitude. What happened here?" The proud commander's facade cracked for just a moment. "Reactor breach, cascade failure, my crew evacuated, but—" His voice, for the first time, wavered. "My cub. Kip is trapped in the reactor chamber. The bulkheads are collapsing, and the radiation will kill him within the hour." Jake blinked. "You have a kid trapped in a nuclear reactor?" Was playing in the engineering sections when the breach occurred. "The emergency blast doors sealed, but now they will not open. I cannot reach him." Veltar's claws scraped against the deck plating. I have failed my bloodline. Well, Jake said, cracking his knuckles, good thing you called the right guy. I specialize in situations that are either impossible or stupid, sometimes both. Veltar stared at him. You would risk your life for my offspring? Why? Jake shrugged. Kid's in trouble. That's pretty much all the reason I need. Plus, I've got nothing better to do today. The reactor chamber was, in Jake's professional opinion, completely screwed. The blast doors were sealed tighter than his ex-wife's purse strings. Radiation was climbing to levels that would turn him into a very stylish pile of ash, and somewhere behind all that death and destruction was a scared kid. The radiation will kill you before you reach the inner chamber, Veltar said, having dragged himself to the engineering section despite Jake's protests. No species can survive those levels. You're probably right, Jake agreed, pulling out his scanner and whistling at the readings. Good thing I'm too stupid to know when to quit. Computer, patch me through to my ship. Captain, the radiation levels are exceeding safe parameters for human physiology by approximately 400%. Yeah, I noticed. Pull up the schematics for this bucket of bolts. I need to find another way in. While his AI worked, Jake started rummaging through his toolkit. Duct tape, emergency sealant, a plasma cutter that he'd definitely acquired legally, and his lucky wrench. The same wrench that had gotten him out of more impossible situations than he cared to count. There, his computer announced. Ventilation shaft 7 Alpha runs parallel to the reactor chamber, diameter approximately 60 centimeters. Veltar snorted. Impossible. Even our smallest engineers cannot fit through spaces that narrow. Good thing I'm not your engineer, Jake said, already pulling the cover off the ventilation shaft. I'm just a guy with a toolkit and a questionable understanding of personal safety. The shaft was pitch black, barely wide enough for Jake's shoulders, and made noises that suggested the structural integrity was more of a polite suggestion than an actual fact. Jake crawled through it anyway, because apparently his survival instincts had decided to take the day off. Human? Veltar's voice crackled through his comm. What is your status? Well, I'm crawling through a space that smells like someone's gym socks, the walls are trying to crush me, and I'm pretty sure something just dripped on my head, so, you know. Tuesday, 20 minutes of claustrophobic crawling later, Jake found himself looking down into the reactor chamber through a maintenance grate. Below him, a small Catharan cub huddled behind a piece of machinery, scales pale with fear. Hey there, kiddo, Jake called down. You must be Kip, I'm Jake. Your dad sent me to get you out of here. The cub looked up with huge golden eyes. You are very small for a rescue person. Yeah, I get that a lot. Good news is, small means I can fit in places big scary monsters can't. Bad news is, we need to get you out of here before this whole place comes down. You up for an adventure? Jake dropped down into the chamber, his radiation detector immediately starting to complain in several different languages. The blast door was completely fused shut, the emergency systems were fried, and the structural supports were groaning like his back after a long shift. Okay, Kip, here's the plan. I'm going to jerry-rig a temporary airlock, using my emergency seals and some really creative engineering. Then we're going to crawl through that ventilation shaft like a couple of very determined gophers. What is a gopher? I'll explain later. Right now, help me move this debris. Working with the cub, Jake managed to create what he generously called a radiation-resistant bubble around the ventilation shaft entrance, using emergency sealant, duct tape, and what he privately thought of as percussive maintenance. Applied to several key components. This will never work, came Veltar's voice through the comm. You're probably right, Jake agreed, boosting Kip up into the shaft. But I've got a perfect track record of doing things that will never work. Come on, kid, time to go see your dad. The crawl back through the ventilation system was considerably more entertaining, with a young Kytharan cub asking questions every 3 seconds. Questions like, why do humans smell funny? And, is it true your species leaks water from your eyes when sad? And Jake's personal favorite, Father says humans are weak prey, but you do not seem very prey-like. Well, kiddo, Jake grunted, navigating around a particularly sharp bend. Your dad's got some pretty strong opinions about a lot of things. We'll see if any of them survive the next 10 minutes. When they finally emerged from the shaft, Veltar was exactly where Jake had left him, though considerably paler, and looking like he'd aged about 10 years in the past hour. The moment he saw his cub, something in the massive predator's expression cracked completely. Kip, he breathed. And for a second, Jake saw past all the scales and claws to something that was just a very relieved father. The reunion was brief but intense. Kip launched himself at his father with the kind of enthusiasm that only kids could manage, chattering in rapid Kitharan about the tiny brave human who had crawled through impossible spaces to reach him. Veltar's massive claws, so recently threatening Jake's life, now gently checked his cub for injuries with the delicate touch of someone handling spun glass. Well, Jake said, dusting off his hands and trying not to think about how many regulations he just violated. That was fun. Kid's got some lungs on him, by the way. Pretty sure he could wake the dead with that volume. Veltar's yellow eyes fixed on Jake with an expression that was equal parts confusion and something that might have been awe. You have done the impossible, human. My cub lives because of your actions. Jake. My name's Jake. And it wasn't impossible, just inconvenient. Like most of the good stuff in life. I do not understand. Veltar's formal speech patterns seemed to be slipping as his composure cracked further. You risked your life for my offspring. You crawled through spaces that would terrify our greatest warriors. You succeeded where I, a commander of the Imperial fleet, failed completely. And you speak of it as if it were nothing. Jake pulled out his first aid kit, the same battered case that had seen him through a dozen emergencies. Look, Commander, I don't know what kind of reputation humans have out here, but where I come from, you don't leave kids in burning buildings. Or radioactive reactor chambers. Whatever. He knelt beside Veltar, ignoring the way those deadly claws tensed. Now hold still. This is going to sting, but it'll stop the bleeding. For several long moments the bridge was silent except for Jake's quiet work and Kip's continued chatter. Veltar submitted to the medical attention with the stunned compliance of someone whose entire worldview had just been turned upside down and shaken vigorously. Your species is classified as prey, Veltar said finally, his voice uncertain for the first time since Jake had met him. Weak, fragile, short-lived and soft. Yet you have shown courage that our greatest heroes would envy. Yeah, well, classifications are for people who've never had to fix a hyperdrive with a paperclip and some prayer, Jake replied, sealing the wound with practiced efficiency. You okay there, big guy? You're looking a little shell-shocked. Shell-shocked? Confused. Rattled, like someone just told you everything you thought you knew was wrong. Veltar was quiet for a long moment, one massive claw gently stroking his cub's head. Perhaps, he said slowly, it was. What happened next was something Jake would remember for the rest of his considerably longer than expected life. Commander Veltar, all 9 feet of apex predator, all that pride and imperial authority and genetic superiority, slowly lowered himself to one knee. "Whoa, hey, what are you doing?" Jake asked, taking a step back. "Did I break something? Are you having some kind of medical episode?" "I am acknowledging a life debt," Veltar said, his voice carrying a weight that made the air itself seem heavier. "Among my people there is no higher honor than the preservation of bloodline. You have not merely saved my cub, human Jake. You have preserved my genetic legacy, my family line, my very purpose for existing." Kip, apparently sensing the gravity of the moment, had gone unusually quiet and was watching his father with wide, solemn eyes. "By the old codes, by the sacred laws that have governed our species since we first reached for the stars, I name you Pack Friend, Blood Bond, Protector of my house." Veltar's massive head bowed. "I am in your debt, until the stars grow cold." Jake stared at the kneeling alien commander and felt distinctly uncomfortable. "Look, Veltar, this is very nice and all, but I really don't need anyone kneeling to me. I'm just a guy with a wrench who happened to be in the right place at the right time." "You do not understand," Veltar said, rising to his feet but keeping his eyes respectfully lowered. "A life debt among the Kitharan is not a simple thank you. It is a binding oath. My honor, my standing, my very identity is now tied to your well-being. Where you go, my protection follows. Your enemies become my enemies. Your cause becomes my cause." "Okay, that's a lot," Jake said, running a hand through his hair. "Can we maybe dial it back to like a nice fruit basket or something?" Before Veltar could answer, the bridge lights suddenly blazed to life, and Jake's comm crackled with incoming transmissions. Multiple voices, all speaking rapid Kitaran, all sounding very official and very concerned. "The fleet has arrived," Veltar explained, straightening into something resembling his former commanding posture. "They come to investigate the distress signal." "Great, and I'm guessing they're not going to be thrilled to find a human aboard their flagship." Veltar's expression was grim. "The Kytharan Empire has strong opinions about other species, particularly those we consider inferior." The blast doors to the bridge hissed open, and 3 more Kitharans entered, all of them armed, all of them looking like they could bench press a small moon. They took in the scene. Their wounded commander, the human with the first aid kit, and little Kip clinging to his father's leg, with expressions that ranged from confusion to outright hostility. The largest of the 3, wearing enough decorations to stock a jewelry store, stepped forward. "Commander Veltar, what is the meaning of this? Why is there prey aboard the Bloodfang?" "Admiral Kresh," Veltar said formally, "this human saved my cub's life. He is under my protection." The silence that followed could have been cut with a knife and served at dinner. Admiral Kresh's eyes narrowed to slits. You expect me to believe that this soft thing accomplished what our best engineers could not? Jake cleared his throat. If it helps, I used a lot of duct tape. The look Admiral Kresh gave him suggested that it did not, in fact, help. Father pulled me from the burning meadow place, Kip piped up suddenly, his young voice cutting through the tension. He crawled through the tiny spaces and made jokes, and was not afraid of the angry atoms. The child speaks truth, Veltar said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. This human risked his life to save my bloodline. By the ancient codes, he is pack friend to House Veltar. The other Kitharis exchanged looks that spoke volumes, none of it particularly flattering to Jake's life expectancy. Furthermore, Veltar continued, his voice growing stronger, he will travel under my protection. Any who would harm him must first answer to me. Admiral Kresh's claws extended slightly. Commander, your judgment may be compromised by recent events. My judgment, Veltar said quietly, has never been clearer. This human has shown me that strength is not always measured in claws and scales. Perhaps it is time our empire learned the same lesson. Jake, who had been following this exchange like a spectator at the galaxy's most dangerous tennis match, finally spoke up. Look, this has been great, really, but I've got a delivery to make and I'm already behind schedule, so if we could maybe wrap up the whole honor-debt thing, I'd really appreciate it. The stunned silence that greeted this statement suggested that perhaps Jake had just said something either very wise or very stupid. Possibly both. 3 months later, Jake was discovering that fame was considerably more annoying than nearly dying in a radioactive reactor chamber. The story had spread through the galaxy like wildfire, growing more elaborate with each retelling. By the time it reached the Outer Rim territories, Jake had apparently single-handedly fought off an entire Catharan battle fleet while juggling flaming plasma torches and reciting human poetry. I don't even know any poetry, Jake complained to his ship's computer, as he tried to enjoy a quiet cup of coffee in what used to be his favorite cantina. Now it was full of beings from a dozen different species, all craning their necks to get a look at the human who made a Kitharan kneel. You could learn some, his AI suggested helpfully. I have several thousand epic poems in my database. Not helping. The worst part wasn't the stares or the whispered conversations that followed him wherever he went. The worst part was that everything had changed. Species that had previously viewed humans as barely sentient labor were suddenly very interested in cultural exchange programs. Trade routes that had been closed to human ships for decades were mysteriously opening up. Even the Galactic Council, that exclusive club of advanced civilizations, had sent a very polite inquiry about humanity's interest in observer status. Jake's comm unit chirped, displaying an incoming call from a familiar contact. He accepted it with a resigned sigh. Uncle Jake! Kit's enthusiastic voice filled the cantina, causing several patrons to nearly choke on their drinks. The young Kitharan had taken to calling Jake uncle, despite his father's attempts to explain proper forms of address. Hey there, kiddo. How's the family business? Father says I cannot join the Imperial Navy until I am older, but he is teaching me to fight. Would you like to see my claws? Maybe later, Kip. Is your dad around? I am here, pack friend. Veltar's deeper voice took over the transmission. In the background, Jake could hear the bustle of what sounded like a very busy military command center. I trust you are well, aside from being galactic news. Yeah, I'm fine. How are things on your end? There was a pause that spoke volumes. Complicated. The Emperor has questions about my recent associations. Admiral Kresh has been advocating for a full investigation into my fitness for command. Jake frowned. That doesn't sound good. It is not. However, there have been developments. 3 more Catharan commanders have reported successful collaborations with human vessels. Emergency rescues, technical solutions, diplomatic interventions. It seems your species has a talent for being in the right place at the right time, designed specifically for the wrong place, depending on your perspective. Indeed. The point is, resistance to change is encountering some very practical obstacles. It is difficult to argue against results, even when those results challenge our fundamental beliefs. Through the cantina windows, Jake could see a familiar sight. A Catharan escort ship keeping pace with the station. Veltar had made good on his promise of protection, though Jake suspected it was causing the commander more political headaches than he let on. Speaking of which, Veltar continued, I have received word that the Zephyrian Collective wishes to discuss trade agreements with human merchants. Apparently, they are impressed by what they call innovative problem-solving approaches. You mean they heard about the duct tape? Among other things. The point is, pack friend, your actions have created ripples that continue to spread. Species that have never given humanity a second thought are now reconsidering their assumptions. Jake's comm unit chirped again, this time with another distress signal. He looked at the readout and sighed. Civilian transport, engine failure. requesting immediate assistance, the usual. Beltar, I've gotta go. Someone else is having a bad day. As always, your timing is impeccable. Kip wishes to say goodbye. Bye, Uncle Jake. Father says you are going to save more people. Yeah, kiddo, it's what we do. Jake closed the connection and stood up, leaving credits on the table. The other patrons watched him go, with expressions ranging from curiosity to something that might have been respect. A few even nodded as he passed. Outside, the Lucky Strike waited in her berth, looking exactly as shabby and reliable as ever. Jake paused at the airlock, looking back at the station. Representatives from a dozen species went about their business, and for the first time in galactic history, humans were part of that business, as equals, rather than afterthoughts. Computer, set course for those coordinates, and start another pot of coffee. Certainly, Captain. Shall I log this as another routine rescue mission? Jake grinned as he settled into the pilot's seat. Computer, when have any of my missions ever been routine? Never, sir. Initiating departure sequence. As the Lucky Strike pulled away from the station, Jake caught sight of the Catharan escort ship adjusting its course to follow. Somewhere out there, another impossible situation was waiting for someone crazy enough to tackle it. Another chance to prove that sometimes the best solutions came from the most unexpected places. Just another day at the office, Jake muttered, and fired up the engines. After all, the galaxy was full of people who needed help, and Jake Morrison had never been one to leave a job half-finished, even if that job was accidentally changing the course of galactic civilization one ridiculous rescue at a time. The distress signal pulsed on his console, patient and insistent. Jake cracked his knuckles, checked his tool belt, and wondered what fresh hell awaited him this time. He couldn't wait to find out.